Hey everyone, it's Jen. It's Monday afternoon. Hope you're all doing well and had a great weekend, and happy Mother's Day to everyone who was either celebrating their mom or they are a mom themselves. And just wanted to talk about being gluten free. So I decided to do a series on this as I was preparing for Jack's first communion party on Saturday, and how I was doing a lot of gluten-free foods for it. And I apologize if my phone knocks over because my cat is up on the table with me and trying to eat my fake flowers because she's crazy. Anyway, back to my story. So as I was preparing, and like I do for most of the parties that we host, I try to make and get the foods that I can eat. So I want to be able to enjoy the foods that I'm preparing, and I don't necessarily worry about it not about serving regular versus gluten-free, and I just try to make something that everybody's going to be happy with. So that's where I started out with this, and I thought I would give a little bit of history of how I started eating gluten-free and where I am now. So I have been eating gluten-free for about almost 7 years. I think it was September 2010 when I started, and at that point in time, I'd had two family members, at least two family members diagnosed with celiac disease, my cousin and my uncle, and then 2 or 3 other people who are cousins with my mom on her side as well are diagnosed with celiac. And we had gone up to a baseball game to see the Red Sox, and I ate lots of junk food and drank beer, which I don't drink much beer at all anymore at all. But at that time, I was pretty much drinking wine most of the time, but I would have a beer on occasion, and I probably had a couple more than I normally would have, and I was sick for days. I felt horrible by the end of the day, and not so much that I was like hungover, okay, like that, but I had more than my body was accustomed to having. And between that and the food that I was eating, my stomach wasn't right probably 4 or 5 days later. And I went to my doctor, and I'd always had some stomach issues anyway, so I went to my doctor and I said, but usually it doesn't usually last this long. And so she recommended to me that I go on an elimination diet, but they were also going to run some blood tests to see what was going on. And so she suggested to me that I could either start with dairy or I could start with gluten and wheat. And I said, well, I have family members that are celiac. And she's like, well, that makes sense to start there. So I did. And I did I got blood tests done before I started. So the blood tests came back not indicating any sort of celiac disease. But about 2 to 3 weeks later, as I had cut it out of my system, I was starting to feel better. I went to a GI doctor who confirmed that the blood tests weren't showing that I had celiac. But she said if not eating gluten helps you, then don't eat it. So that's kind of a hard thing to do, right? So you're told that you don't have this, but if it makes you feel better, don't eat it. And the weird thing about celiac disease, and as my uncle will tell you, when he was diagnosed probably, 45 or 50, I'm not really sure exactly when, is that it can manifest anytime. So it could have been that I wasn't showing in my blood tests. It could have been that I needed more testing done. But at the same time, as I was seeing results and feeling better, I was kind of okay with just saying, all right, I just won't eat it. And so I did, and I cut it out of my diet and felt better than I had in a while. But since it wasn't necessarily the disease, I would let myself cheat on occasion. And at the beginning, the big thing for me was bloating. I would have knots in my stomach. I could feel like the gluten knot when I went back, like it was like this hardness about my stomach. And it wasn't horrible. It wasn't, if I had just one thing here and there, it wasn't awful. So occasionally I would cheat, and then, but like anything, the more you do it, the more you're going to have side effects. And so then I realized, okay, I really can't do this. I really do need to cut back and commit to this. So I did that again, and I became pretty much 100% gluten-free for the next year or so, and with very few cheats at all. And the last time I can remember that I actively ate gluten, and I will admit that I do some cross-contamination because I'm not super sensitive. I think if I knew I was celiac, I wouldn't do that at all, but I can get away with like a French fries in the same fryer and that kind of stuff, depending on how I want to feel and if I want to risk it. But the last time I remember actively eating gluten was at a restaurant opening a few years ago, and some of the foods were free, and it was free appetizers, and I had some of my favorites, one of their soups, some fried calamari, a burger with the bun. I had one glass of wine, and about an hour and a half later, I was passed out on the couch. I slept for 13 hours, and I couldn't get out of bed the next day. I was a wreck. And so that's what I posted earlier this morning about, did I get gluten or is it just a hangover? That's exactly how it feels for me now. I actually don't even know, because I haven't had a cookie or a piece of bread or anything in probably about 4 years. So when people ask me what happens when you eat it, I don't know anymore. I know that I get foggy. I know that it feels like I'm hungover. I know that the more that I don't have it, the more sensitive I am. So it's not even an option. So I say that I live like I am celiac. I know people who have celiac disease that aren't as strict as I am. Like I said, I can get away with some of the cross-contamination. If I do have celiac, which I couldn't even go back right now, I suppose I could get an endoscopy to find out. I can't do blood tests because you need to go back to eating gluten for a couple months, I believe it is, to have anything show up in your blood system for it. So, and I couldn't even do it for a day. I can't even imagine. So I'm okay with that. And so some people say it's hard. Oh, I can never do it. It's just something you do. If it makes you feel better, you do it. So that's my story. I'll add a little bit more details in my blog about it and how I started. And then this week I'll talk about, whether or not being gluten-free is a diet. And some people using it for weight loss. I know it's been trendy, and how that is both helped and hindered people who actually need gluten-free. In some ways it's been great. In other ways it can be troublesome, and I'll address that. And then I'll actually come up with some meal plans and how I eat on a daily basis, and what do I do when I go to a restaurant, what do I do when I go to parties, and things along those lines. So that's what we can look forward to for this week, and I want to thank you guys for joining. I know Amy and Corinne were on, so thanks for checking me out. And if anybody has any questions about gluten-free, whether it's testing for it, whether it's how to prepare for somebody who is a friend, family member, whether it's something you think you need to do, just shoot me a message or comment, and I'm happy to help. I'm not going to claim that I'm an expert, but I've been doing it for a little while. And I have more family members and friends who end up needing to eat gluten-free as time goes on. So it's something that I'm just used to doing. So I'll talk to y'all later. Thanks. Bye.